There are two fundamental structures that Gurdjieff explicitly mentions and emphasises so much that they are absolutely obvious. There are others, of course, as well. But in answer to your question, let me just mention these two fundamental structures that we have fallen into and cannot escape from. And this, I emphasise that this is our problem. We can't get out of these structures because we don't have the energies to do so. Not as a result of any fault on our part. That is to say, it's not a machismo teaching. That it's not efforts on our part that will allow us to escape from these structures. It is energy. We have fallen to such a low energetic level that we are trapped in these structures. Now the two explicit ones, of course, Gurdjieff writes throughout his writings that man is a three-brained or three-centred being. So we are a three-centred being. Now what does this mean? Now in fact, when we examine it, we realise that Gurdjieff is emphasising this because at any one time, only one of these centres, only one of these brains, is actually in connection with the world, experiencing the world or perceiving the world. Only one of the three. So what this means is that any one time, only one of those centres is actually perceiving the world. And by the time we realise that we are perceiving the world with that one centre, there is a flow of energy in us which has already taken us to another centre. Another centre is now experiencing the world, perceiving the world. So, what are the consequences of this situation? It means that at any one time, only one centre is experiencing the world, in contact with the world, or can be in contact with the world if we make an effort. The consequences of this are, first of all, we cannot observe ourselves. And this Gurdjieff emphasised. I think it's New York, 1924, something like that. He says, self-observation is enough in the beginning. Do not try anything else. Do not try anything else. Self-observation is enough for several years. And why are we trying to observe ourselves? Gurdjieff is explicit. It's in the book Views from the Real World, published under his name, Gurdjieff. And what Gurdjieff says is, you must try and try and try to remember to observe yourself, try and try and try to observe yourself to come to the realization that you can't do it. So this is psychology. A failure in our psychology. We can't observe ourselves. An abnormality in our psychology. We can't observe ourselves, pointing back to a structural situation. We are three-centred or three-brained beings with the implications of this realization. Now within this idea of self-observation, if you read the book In Search of the Miraculous by Ouspensky, within the context of self-observation, Gurdjieff gathered the group together in St. Petersburg. He said, what is the most important thing you have discovered from your efforts at self-observation? The group waffled on about various things, as we do in our groups. But Gurdjieff told them. He said to them, well, he didn't say this because it will make it too obvious, but he said, essentially, the most important thing that you have observed in your self-observation is that you do not remember yourself. Try to remember yourself whilst observing yourself. Well, he knew that they couldn't observe themselves, so of course they couldn't remember themselves. So Gurdjieff gave the task of self-remembering within the context of self-observation. Later on, 2 years later, it's reported, Ouspensky in fact writes this marvellous line in the book In Search of the Miraculous. He writes, attempts at self-remembering gave no results whatsoever except to show me that we do not do it. We do not do it. We can't do it. Gurdjieff said, good, what more do you want? A man who knows this already knows very much. But what does he know? He knows that he can't observe himself. And he knows that he can't remember himself. Why? Because he's trapped in this structure of having three centres. We should be distinct. There should be four entities, in a sense, in us. There should be three centres, and there should be us. Why are we not there? And Gurdjieff's point in doing this, he's pointing back to the structural situation, that we cannot maintain ourselves independently of the three centres, the flow of energies between the three centres going on endlessly. We can't maintain ourselves distinct from the three centres because we don't have the energies to do so. This is made explicit in Self-Remembering. Gurdjieff said to Ouspensky, read the book In Search of the Miraculous. He said, we come to the realization that we must remember ourselves, but we can remember ourselves only if we have in ourselves the energies for self-remembering. He didn't say, try and try and try and try, and try and try and try and try to remember yourself. He said, we can't remember ourselves because we don't have in us the energies for self-remembering. So it's a teaching that's not about self-remembering. It's not about self-observation. It's about the energies that we don't have that would allow us to do these things. So the first structure is we are three-brained or three-centered beings. Now I know Ouspensky says and writes explicitly in the book In Search of the Miraculous. He says there are not three centres in the ordinary man. Well, we just have to take care with this book. Gurdjieff everywhere writes man is a three-centred being, because this is the structure. He's pointing back to this structure that we are now trapped in. Now, if we take the second structure, this is not even mentioned ever in the Gurdjieff tradition. It's not mentioned by Ouspensky, it's not in Search of the Miraculous, it's not in anything about Gurdjieff, but Gurdjieff from the very start of his own book, The Tales of Beelzebub, to his grandson, writes that man has two consciousnesses having nothing in common. So this is a structure. We have two consciousnesses, that is two conscious minds, having, he says in the chapter on hypnosis, absolutely nothing in common. Two conscious minds having absolutely nothing in common. We are in fact living in the wrong one. We're living in a consciousness at a lower level, a false, fictitious and unreal consciousness, a false, fictitious and unreal conscious mind at a lower level, with a state of consciousness that is not a true state of consciousness. A state of consciousness that he referred to Ouspensky as waking sleep. Initially as sleep, but later as waking sleep. So we have two conscious minds having absolutely nothing in common. We are living in the wrong one, in a state of waking sleep, at two lower levels. So we're trapped in a structure, two conscious minds. Now, as I've said, absolutely no mention of this in the Gurdjieff tradition, coming from Ouspensky. But this is Gurdjieff's teaching, this is what Gurdjieff wrote. So, we don't have a true state of consciousness because we're living in a false, fictitious and unreal conscious mind. The other conscious mind in us, we have two conscious minds having nothing in common. The other conscious mind in us has a true state of consciousness, consciousness of self. And Gurdjieff is pointing out that we don't have consciousness of self. Why not? This is a psychological state, admittedly, I'll give you that. But Gurdjieff pointed out the psychology to show the structural situation. We have two conscious minds having nothing in common. We are living in the wrong one. So in answer to your question, Gurdjieff was teaching psychology only to point out the abnormalities in our psychology, pointing back to the fact that we are trapped in structural situations from which we cannot emerge. Why are we trapped in three centres, three brains? Because we don't have the energy to be ourselves, to maintain ourselves as distinct from the three centres. Why are we trapped in two conscious minds having nothing in common and we are living in the wrong one? Because we don't have the energies to maintain ourselves in our true conscious mind. So we have to live in a false, fictitious and unreal conscious mind at a lower level in a state of consciousness known as waking sleep. So Gurdjieff was not teaching psychology. If he taught psychology as it appears, as the Gurdjieff tradition suggests, it was for a reason. It was to point back to the fact that we are living in a structural situations, trapped in these situations, and they, being trapped in these structural situations, result in an abnormal psychology. In the case of three centres or three brains, we can't observe ourselves and we can't remember ourselves. In the case of two conscious minds having nothing in common, we are living in the wrong one. We don't have a true state of consciousness of self. But these are the consequences of the structural situations which Gurdjieff is explaining here. So in answer to your question, there's the first two structures that we are absolutely and totally trapped in. And of course we're trapped in them because we don't have energies. It's not a psychological situation, it's a structural situation, it's an energetic situation. Man the machine. A machine is a complex device made by man in order to perform a specific function or functions, and it always has an operator. We're not learning here from Gurdjieff about the operator of the machine. We're learning about the machine, the structure, the energies of the machine, which lead in consequence to an abnormal psychology. The question of the pupil. You have explained that Gurdjieff was teaching that there is a break in the chain of energetic production in us, and that as a result we do not receive the food of impressions as we should. We do not have the energies we should have, and we fall to a very low energetic level in which we are trapped in internal structures from which we cannot escape. That is to say, we cannot maintain ourselves because we don't have the energies to do so, as distinct from these structures. And you've given examples of structures. That we are three-centred or three-brain beings is a structure. That we have two consciousnesses having nothing in common, that is to say, two conscious minds having nothing in common, we are living in the wrong one. This is a structural situation as a result of an energetic situation. Could we say, therefore, that Gurdjieff's teaching is, in a sense, simply about remedying this break in the chain of energetic production in us? The teacher replies, there are two situations in Gurdjieff's teaching, as you have said in your question. One is we can remedy this break in the chain of energetic production in us. That is, we can start to receive the food of impressions as we should. We can't do this by efforts on our part. We have to do this, initially at least, by techniques. The second aspect of Gurdjieff's teaching is that if we look at the second food diagram, which appears, this is in the book In Search of the Miraculous by Ouspensky, of course, but this second food diagram appears to be an augmented energetic state. It is quite complex. It is in fact a normal state of the normal man. This is how we should be. But we are not like this. We are in the situation of the first food diagram, which appears a depleted energetic state. So at each level we have to re-establish this food diagram. We have to re-establish the processes, the situation. We have to re-establish these connections, these energies, and the activities of all these energies. So the situation is, first we must remedy this break in the chain of energetic production. That is to say, we must start to acquire the food of impressions as we should. Now there is a problem with this, which comes from the structural situation into which we have fallen. That is, we have two consciousnesses, two conscious minds having nothing in common. We are living in the wrong one. Now if we look at the first food diagram, then we realise that the food of impressions sounds in us in this diagram only as do. It does not develop do, re, mi as it should. Now this happens for two reasons. We are living in we have two conscious minds rather, and we are living in the wrong one. So the food of impressions sounds in us only as do because it is received by us in this false, fictitious and unreal conscious mind that we are living in. Our true conscious mind does not receive these impressions. So they don't develop as they should. So the difficulty is, one, it is possible to remedy this break in the chain of energetic production in us. That is to say, our true conscious mind will receive the food of impressions coming from perception. This is all about perception. Our true conscious mind will receive the food of impressions coming from perception. But the second condition of this is that we must have something to digest, to allow us to digest, as it were, these food of impressions. So there are in fact two processes going on. One, we must ensure that our true conscious mind receives from our perceptions the food of impressions. And secondly, there must be something in our true conscious mind already existing, already present, to digest, to, as it were, capture, to make use of these impressions. So I'll pause there and we'll restart in a moment. Okay, well, let's go back to your question. You're asking about this break in the chain of energetic production in us, which is in fact the situation that we receive the food of impressions coming from perception, and it sounds in us only as do. It does not develop, it is not digested by us, it is not made use of by us in any constructive way at all. It just sounds in us like a cracked bell, do. Now, in this situation, if we look at what Gurdjieff actually wrote about this, this is from the Tales of Beelzebub to his grandson. Gurdjieff writes, "In my opinion, the trouble with you in the present instance is perhaps chiefly due to the fact that while still in childhood, there was implanted in you an excellently working automatism for perceiving all kinds of new impressions." So according to Gurdjieff, we have an automatism for perceiving new impressions, the food of impressions, as he mentioned to Ouspensky, and Ouspensky has recorded for us. He says this was implanted in us in childhood. We don't know what this means. But we have an excellently working automatism as ordinary men and women for perceiving all kinds of new impressions. So the food of impressions does not develop in us as it should. It sounds in us as do, and only as do. It sounds in us in a false, fictitious and unreal conscious mind at a very low level. It does not sound in us in our true conscious mind as it should. So, in the light of this, there are three things we can do, three possible ways to proceed. The first of these, we can disrupt this automatism, this excellently working automatism, we can make it not work excellently. So we can disrupt it. The second, we have the possibility of bypassing it. That is, we either go to one side of it or the other. We can think of it as something blocking our experience of the world, our perception of the world. We can go to one side or the other, or we can go over it, or we can go under it. So we can bypass it. Or thirdly, once we understand the situation completely and have developed a little bit into this situation, then we have the possibility of overcoming, consciously overcoming this excellently working automatism. So there are these three ways of proceeding, which will allow us to receive the food of impressions increasingly, more or less, as we should. So we can disrupt the automatism, we can bypass the automatism, or we can eventually overcome this automatism. Now, of course, once we begin in this work, for the first decade or so, or a couple of decades, or maybe more, then only the first two are possible. We can't overcome an excellently working automatism. We don't know what it is, we don't know where it comes from, we don't know anything about it. So we've got to learn this. So effectively there are two means of progressing. One, we can disrupt this excellently working automatism. And we can see that this is what Gurdjieff was doing. If we read the biographies of Gurdjieff, these adorations of Gurdjieff, and Gurdjieff was constantly disrupting the routines of life. He was constantly disrupting this excellently working automatism. It doesn't matter how, it doesn't matter what he did. Although these are of course important if you're writing a biography of Gurdjieff. But to us, they have no significance. It's just he's disrupting the automatism of his pupils and of himself. In this way, this automatism is disrupted and we receive, perhaps only partially, but at least we receive something from the food of impressions, as we should. Now the second way is that we can bypass this excellently working automatism. And when we look at what Gurdjieff was actually teaching to Ouspensky and others in Moscow and St. Petersburg, in the early years of his teaching, then this was a fairly leisurely affair. Ouspensky gives a picture of this, Anna Budkovsky gives a picture of this. These two pictures are completely different, but we can get the impression that Gurdjieff was actually working in a fairly leisurely way. And the teaching he was giving, recorded by Ouspensky and used by Ouspensky in part as Ouspensky's system in London from 1921 to 1941. This was a teaching that Gurdjieff was giving to bypass our excellently working automatism. So Gurdjieff was using these two possibilities. We can disrupt this excellently working automatism, and we can bypass it. So the teaching that Gurdjieff gives and is recorded by Ouspensky in the book In Search of the Miraculous is designed to bypass this excellently working automatism for perceiving all kinds of new impressions, so that we do receive the food of impressions. Now, we don't know that we're receiving the food of impressions for the reasons I've mentioned earlier, because we have two conscious minds having nothing in common. We are living the wrong one at a lower level. So the automatism is operating at the lower level, in the conscious mind that we now have and that we now inhabit. So when the food of impressions actually reaches our true conscious mind, which remains in us, Gurdjieff says, we don't know it, because we're living at a lower level in a false, fictitious and unreal conscious mind. So we don't know that we are receiving the food of impressions. We don't know what Gurdjieff is doing. until he writes his book, and his book is published in 1950, and we can read it, and we can read that our problem is that we have this excellently working automatism for perceiving all kinds of new impressions. We can also read the book In Search of the Miraculous by Ouspensky, because it was published in 1950. And in this book we see, well, the food of impressions in the first food diagram sounds in us only as dough. Why does it sound in us only as dough? Because we have an excellently working automatism for perceiving all kinds of new impressions. So gradually we can develop in ourselves a picture of what the situation is that Gurdjieff is describing, the complexity of it, and yet in a sense the simplicity of it, because it's a break in the chain of energetic production in us. So we remedy this break in the chain of energetic production in us. How are we going to do it? We have to disrupt the automatism in terms of our perception. So we can disrupt our routines, we can disrupt this automatism so that it's no longer automatic, or we can bypass it. And we can see that Gurdjieff was using both techniques. And for the biographers of Gurdjieff, this is fascinating. It presents a chaotic situation of some sort of madman from the East teaching who knows what. But when we examine what is written, what has been published, we can actually see what was Gurdjieff doing all the time for his pupils. He was disrupting the excellently working automatism for perceiving all kinds of new impressions, and he was bypassing this excellently working automatism for perceiving all kinds of new impressions. So his pupils then started to receive, unknown to them, the food of impressions, remedying the break in the chain of energetic production in us.